Welcome, Hillman TikTok students, to Class 5 of Sounds of Culture, Intro to AVE. Today we're going to be diving into how AVE is represented in literature, music, and film. Throughout history, AV has played a significant role in shaping cultural narratives, from early slave narratives and writings to modern day hip hop lyrics and Hollywood film. We're going to explore how authors have used AVE to create authentic voices and how musicians have preserved and evolved the language through sound, how film and television have both celebrated and misrepresented Black speech. As we go through the course today, the lesson, I do want you to think critically about representation. Who's telling these stories? How is AV used to shape characters and narratives? And what happens when non Black creators attempt to replicate or appropriate AV? Before we touch on some specific examples of AVE in literature, music, and film, I do want to take a step back and discuss the broader picture. So, throughout history, Black writers, musicians, filmmakers have used AV to reflect the realities of Black life. They communicate shared experiences and push back against mainstream narratives that have often been used to exclude or misrepresent them. And in literature, we look at early slave narratives, we look at the Harlem Renaissance work and contemporary novels that serve as a way to create authentic dialogue and to bring characters to life. In music, we see AV being used as a fundamental element of jazz, blues, and hip hop, but also influencing mainstream speech patterns. And so you'll look at its influences on global pop culture. Um, Starting with early spirituals to rap and trap music, AAV continues to evolve and adapt to the environment it's being used in, but still remaining very much rooted and tied deeply to Black experience. When it comes to film and television, the presence of AAV has been more complicated. There's a little more of a nuance when you look at productions that celebrate authentically and authentically portray Black speech, while others rely on stereotypical representations to use or exploit Black culture. Social media and internet culture also plays a major role in this in spreading AVE both positively and negatively, and these will then lead to the concerns about cultural appropriation. For centuries, Black speech has been used and has been present in literature. It is a powerful tool for storytelling and cultural preservation, and it is used to make social commentary. However, as we have already stated, there have been times where it's been used by both Black and non Black writers in a distorted way and almost a mockery. And so we're going to look at that. Some of the earliest written records of AE will be the slave narratives, where many of the enslaved who were denied formal education were able to pass down their history and tell stories through oral tradition. It was a way of speaking and documenting things like their autobiographies. So if you look at the incidents of a slave girl by Harriet Jacobs, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass by Frederick Douglass, you see how important it is in these early narratives to use AVE and put things in their own words. But we do have to understand that many of these writings in the beginning were edited by white abolitionists who more than likely altered the original speech patterns, sometimes even to appeal more to white audiences. So then we move to the 19th and early 20th century, where AAV continues to be represented and presented by white authors who are attempting to replicate black speech. And sometimes, even with good intentions, they are reinforcing harmful stereotypes. One well known example of this is going to be Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which includes the characters, much like Jim, who speak in a dialect that is meant to represent AVE. However, Twain's depiction is very complex. On one hand, he does humanize Jim in a way that is radical for the time, but on the other hand, he also uses black speech through a filtered white perspective that then furthers the stereotype and the misnomer of using it. Another significant figure during that era is Charles Chesnutt. Now, Charles is a black writer who uses AV in his short stories to authentically capture the voices of his black characters. He uses also in the way to engage with themes of race and identity. And so his work stands out in contrast to the minstrel style depictions that were common for white authored literature. Then you come on to the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and the 1930s, where black writers are fully embracing AVE as a legitimate powerful literary tool. Authors like Zora Neale Hurston, as Their Eyes Are Watching God, uses AAVE to create dialogues in a rich and authentic characters, and she still faces criticism even from fellow black intellectuals such as Richard Wright, who feels that her using this dialect plays into white stereotypes. But I would say that if you look back at her work now, its cultural significance, its linguistic authenticity that really makes it stand out. Other Harlem figures that also we should talk about are Langston Hughes again. And Langston used prose and poetry in particular to create and weave these character driven stories about everyday black life. And so the writers this period are, in a way, rebelling and shifting the conversation about Abe needing to be something that needs to be fixed or created, taught proper essentially, and instead is being used as a powerful expression of black identity. And AAVE is used in the past to justify, um, you know, what today's authors are now embracing as legitimate and necessary forms of expression. So you look at black authors like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Jesmyn Ward, who are influential in creating novels such as Beloved, The Bluest Eye, and they masterfully weave AV to bring their characters to life to preserving the rhythms and structures of black speech. I do believe it was Toni Morrison that said that she wrote for black readers first, not feeling the need to translate for white audiences. And so that's a marked shift in literature that you'll see, where they're saying AAV is not to just be tolerated, it is supposed to be celebrated. And so, similarly, if you see Alice Walker's The Color Purple, it's written in a style that reflects AVE, particularly in Seeley's letters. And so, Walker's choice to use this was very intentional to create Seeley's voice authentically and to let the readers connect even deeper with the personal struggles and her growth throughout the novel. In young adult, and children's literature, AV has become even more prominent. You look at Angie Thomas's "The Hate You Give" is a perfect example. The novel follows Star, a black teenager who code switches between the way she speaks at home and the way she speaks at her mostly white private school. And so the dynamic and the switch back and forth between AVE also highlights the real life struggles of black youth who have to navigate multilinguistic, multicultural spaces. And so Thomas then uses AAVE through Star to show real and relatable ways of how mainstream and the outside world can almost try to sanitize you. Jason Reynolds is another major figure in young adult literature that incorporates AEV in their books, The Long Way Down and in Ghost. His writings capture the natural speech pattern of black youth. And I think that is one of the things that needs to be understood, that when a person of color is writing AV, someone who's grown up and exposed to that, they give their readers characters who sound like them authentically. They are able to then successfully challenge outdated ideas about what literature sounds like, that you must conform to standard English to be respected. In addition to that, when you see the pushback, despite these advancements, you have to continuously challenge and criticize where that pushback is coming through. It comes under the guise of concerns about grammar and readability, but ongoing, and a lot of times it's respectability politics, where certain black speech and black speech patterns are considered lesser within the black or outside of the black community. So one of the issues you get into is that, when black authors use it authentically, and, non-black authors then try to replicate that, it becomes offensive almost, because it is not cultural appreciation, it's cultural appropriation. And so that's why the mindset of FUBU, for us, by us, in our own words, become very, very important. So next I want to focus on AAV and music. When I say music, I specifically mean at this point for this discussion, rap, and how AAV is not just used for words, it's power, it's culture, it's representation. So when we look at the way rappers use AAVE to reflect their backgrounds, their environments, their artistic goal, hip hop since its inception has always been connected to broader social issues. Understanding how AAV operates in rap helps us appreciate the artistry, the innovation, and the cultural significance of hip hop as a global phenomenon. So I'm going to start briefly with the other genres, and then we're going to get into a deep dive into hip hop. So, hip hop and AV have been deeply interconnected, from spirituals and the blues to hip hop and modern everyday slang. It's almost a two-way street on where's a chicken and egg, which one came first, or so forth. So, AV has shaped the way we communicate through rhythm and lyrics. And if you look at the blues and jazz era, black musicians use AVE not only in song lyrics but also to communicate with the audience. And you see artists like Bessie Smith, Louis Armstrong, infusing their songs with AV expression that gives their music a unique authenticity. And many blues songs told stories of struggle, of survival, of love. And so AAVE is used to convey these raw emotions, these lived experiences. And so as music evolves and hip hop and rap become two of the most significant carriers of AVE, we see this emergence coming out of the 1970s in the Bronx, where there's a foundation for storytelling, for community, for resistance. And AV is very central to all of this. And Run DMC and the early pioneers of hip hop use AV to create like punchy or rhythmic verses that resonate with urban youth. And then further on, Run DMC and the rest of them walk so that people like Tupac Shakur could really run with it, telling, these poetic stories about systematic oppression, life on the street, black empowerment. You see Outkast, Andre 2000, 3000, especially specifically showcasing how the regional variations can also affect AVE. The southern dialects and how that can influence mainstream hip hop. You have your new crew. You have Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, and the other modern rappers now continuing this tradition of using AV for cultural pride, for self-empowerment, and almost taking back words that were once used against you as weapons. And I think that's important too when you see how hip hop's influences push AAV into the mainstream culture and shaping the way people speak globally. Phrases like on fleek, no cap, lit, all originated within AAV, all originated within hip hop culture. And then they're co opted by these non black communities without acknowledgement. And so, one important thing to continue in this discussion and to keep on is what happens when we have this commodification, like this um, commodification of AV in music, and when industries profit from AV without fully understanding, or artists without fully understanding its cultural roots. Um, White rappers use AVE almost sometimes as a performative costume that they just kind of put on or take off, but they never really experience the social consequences that black people face when they use the same language in both their professional and personal spaces, and especially and specifically in the academic spaces. And so, brand and social media influencers can adopt AVE, and they generally do it for like marketing or almost to pander to, the general consumer, and they don't recognize the language's deep history. And so, in order to preserve and evolve AVE, we also have to understand that we have to call out these complicated relationships that we see, specifically, especially with like film and television. I told you I want to take a deep dive into mainstream hip hop. So, I want to talk about how Black youth cultivated distinctive speech over beats. And, you know, I believe even in the infancy, artists knew and they recognized that they were almost forging a new English. If you look at in 1980, the Treacherous Three, they rapped about a new rap language and they acknowledged the uniqueness of their street divide dialect. In the early recordings in rap in 1970s, 1980s, AVE was featured in lyrics, but it was kind of relatively moderate. Old school rappers like Grandmaster Flash, Run DMC, they use black speech, party people in the place to be, without using excessive slang or profanity. And they kind of teetered a line to kind of ensure their broader appeal and to maintain radio play. But by the time the late 1980s and 1990s come around, you know how rap lyrics got. It was unabashedly black. It was gritty. The vernacular was here to stay. And here we have our little evolution of AV and rap roadmap. And so the 1990s marked a turning point in AV's role in hip hop. As gangster rap emerged and brought that raw, street oriented dialect more into the mainstream. You got rappers like NWA, Tupac Shakur, Notorious B.I.G., and Nas using AAVE in a way that was unapologetically and deeply tied to the street life. the realities of it. And so, some of the things that I want to highlight is like, the multiple negation, ain't nobody got no love for me instead of nobody loves me. You got the copular deletion, we the realists instead of we are the realists. And then you have your regional slang. You have faux show. You have apparently something going on out there. You got word in New York, and like all of these are used to cement the idea of what was going on in that era. And so you can look at AAV changing naturally to coincide with that. It doesn't seem forced. It seems like it's an essential part of the hip hop identity. And so by the early 2000s, it's a dominant form even in popular, and it's widely recognized in global culture, where rappers like Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, Missy Elliott, and T.I. all cross over into pop music. And, AAV phrases and speech patterns follow them to non-black audiences. Social media further amplifies this reach. Phrases that originate in hip hop start spreading rapidly with no connection to it. The memes and everything on Twitter, TikTok. You'll see, all the dance video using the music, and so this kind of propensity perpetuates the cultural appropriation and has a propensity of the language being used by non-black influencers and celebrities, that often do not acknowledge even its original origin. And so when you look at how influential rap music and AV has been viewed globally, it gets more commodified and it gets stripped of its cultural roots. For instance, Iggy Azalea was criticized when she first started out for using a very strong Southern black scent, despite being Australian. And so, the hip hop community is evolving, will code, endorse, and sign on to these people who may not have hip hop or AAV's best interests at heart. And so that is something that we have to keep an eye out on as new slang, new flows, and new ways of structuring rap lyrics emerge from each generation of artists. It's like, how do we stay dynamic? How do we remain relevant and consistent in this ever-changing social and cultural landscape? Don't be a sellout. Like that's the key. That's what it is. So I also want to talk about regional dialects in rap, and it's something that we touched on briefly on last class, but I did make a little grid, just to make it a little easier to digest. Now, New York rap is considered the original sound of hip hop because hip hop was born in the Bronx. The East Coast style is known for its fast-paced, intricate wordplay and lyrical complexity. East Coast rappers often are percussive, they're aggressive, they're dropping the R sound at the end of the words, you're getting that brother instead of brother. Unlike the South, the East Coast rappers do not merge the vowels like pin and pen. And in every New York authentic rap, it's going to be tied to well, not every. Let me take that back. I'm a New Yorker. I was getting gas. I got it. In many New York rap and authentic rap, it's going to be tied to the lyrical skill. MCs pride themselves on complex wordplay, on schemes and rhymes, and so that's not just unique to New York, but it is something that consistently, especially in the beginning, was something you got called out for. Where is it? It was that show and tell. So West Coast rap has developed its own sound, and so it's heavily diversified and influenced by its linguistic environment. So you're going to include the Chicano English, you're going to include the surface slang and the gang culture, and so all that impacts the delivery, and it tends to be a little more laid back, a little more relaxed to the East Coast. West Coast rap has the really stretched out vowel pronunciation, so you're going to get on. It's going to be pronounced like on, and on and on, and they have that fronting. So the th is pronounced as a d. So it's all about this and that and this and that. And so also it's more enunciated in certain parts from East Coast rap because they're not going as fast. It's more of a smooth conversational flow. And so it carries a strong sense of its own street authenticity and particularly holding honor to the gangster rap. And so then, for a long time, I would say, Southern rap wasn't really taken seriously by mainstream hip hop. It was like, that's your little brother, yo. He just trying too much. They too country. They're not lyrical enough to be stomping with the big dogs. But, you know, it took a turn, and Outkast's Andre 3000 made a powerful statement at the 1995 Source Awards, where he was like, the South got something to say, and so it was challenging the perceptions that the Southern AV was something less valid than the Northern dialects, and today and from the 2000s to the 99, Southern rap dominated the industry, with Atlanta being the center of modern hip hop. Southern rap has had, the draws where the vowels are really stretched out as well. It does have the pin pen merger where 10 and 10 sound like the same sound, but like that is I'll count to 10 and that is I rap it in 10. So you look at the rise of trap music led by artists like T.I., Gucci Mane, Future. Despite I hate him, I know y'all love him, but we all got our favorites. But they solidified Southern rap's influence, and so today Southern accents in rap is one of the most recognizable. Then you have your Midwestern rap that kind of bridges the two. And it's a very interesting blend of influences from the North and the South, down to the Great Migration. Due to the due to the Great Migration, Black communities in the Midwest have strong Southern roots, which affects their dialect. Midwest rap is known for the blended accents of rappers who sound more northern but then have a slight southern twang to them. And so rappers are known for being very quick but also very melodic. One of the most notable Midwestern rap styles is going to be like that chopper flow that you see with the Bone Thugs and Harmony. I cannot speak today, and I do not know why. Bone Thugs and Harmony and Tech Nine. It's that really rapid fire delivery, twist in them, and it's a defining feature of Midwest rap. Uh, at this little blurbage of authenticity and cultural impact. So dialects are crucial to because they help preserve local identities, and listeners can tell where a rapper is from just by their accent and the slang that they're using, the AAVE that they employ, because a regional style is very strong. And if a rapper from Atlanta suddenly started using New York AAVE, they would come off as less authentic. Regional style also fuels competition, and you look at the rivalry between the East Coast and the West Coast in the 90s. It was more than about music. It was about family, and it was about how they felt, who had the best or the most real rap style. And so as hip hop became more global, the regional sounds continued to just diversify and become more dynamic. From the beginning, avian rap has never just been a a stylistic linguistic choice. It is more of an assertion of an association with cultural identity and lived experiences. And so rappers who use AV naturally have to draw on their own personal background. And a lot of times, fans and peers can really call you out if they can see that you're using street vernacular signals, but you are not from the streets. You are not a product of the environment. You are a performer. So whether it's the struggle, success, or survival, it comes out in how you present yourself, and it moves beyond the lyrics. It's imbued in you essentially. And so in the interactions, when they speak in their interviews, when they interact on social media, and when they engage in their communities, you continuously see this. And so that's what I would call people out when people are like, "Oh, we never knew Wheelchair Jimmy. I mean Drake was going to have all these issues." When you look at Drake and where he comes from and how he has used AVE and mainstream media, it almost felt like he was performing. He's a good actor. And so for a long time, people thought he was one thing when he was completely something else. And so that is something to realize. There is a difference between being a sellout or a fake or a phony and just code switching. And especially if you code switch too much, if you code switch just to appeal to non black audiences, then you are being disingenuous to who you are. And so that means you're a fraud. And if you're fraudulent, can't nobody mess with you. So as hip hop becomes a global phenomenon, like we taught, and it continues to spread outside of black communities, we have to be very mindful of people who are wearing blackface and black sense, who are performative and they exaggerate the use of AAVE, because that's when it becomes controversial. It's not just white influence. Like I said, all skin folk are not going to be kinfolk. So some of the harm is being done by black people, whether it is in perpetuating the misuse without acknowledging its origins of black communities and black culture. So that perpetuates a theft, but it also can be harmful in signing on to these people who are culture vultures, and that you are assisting in by co-signing them that assisting them with the cultural theft. So a lot of people talk about a lot of these female artists who can't really rap, and they get these people to sign on to them, especially like honestly, if somebody says to that me or whatever that Tyga endorsed this person, I immediately cannot listen to them because I don't trust Tyga. And like everybody has that person that they call out to. It's like I can see who this benefits for, and I can see who gets left behind. I can see the use of the AAVE is not authentic, and I'm not going to contribute to it. And so we have to be very mindful about how we consume these things. I'll talk a little more about that. But for many of the male rappers too, AAVE is used differently. It's used as a marker of toughness and authenticity. And then if you look at how hip hop has been so far associated with hypermasculinity and how male MCs often use AAVE to assert out dominance, to assert confidence and street credibility, female rappers use it on almost a flip side because historically speaking, they have faced many challenges in proving themselves in this male dominated industry. So when they use AVE, they have to flip that gender norm and they have to reclaim words that were historically used against them. And they use AVE to control the narrative, like I said, and this is how generally we do it when we're dealing with the outside world. So they use to control the narrative about their sexuality to ensure that they can be uplifted rather than being objectified. You look at rappers like Missy Elliott, Doja Cat, Doechii, innovating to incorporate AVE with playful sounds and futuristic wordplay. And a lot of the viral songs that go specifically in the last 20 years are based off of coin AV phrases. And so that continues on. So if you look at like, or you look at Hot Girl Summer, you look at phrases like that, significant characters in AAVE are being held and pushed out by women who are using it to redefine words and shape linguistic ability. So beyond vocabulary, though, the male and female performers, rappers are held, like I said, to a different style. So, the men might often use it with more monotone, deep, aggressional tones to sound intimidating or dominate, like DMX. While the women might use more exaggerated inflections and tonal shifts. You look at Nicki Minaj, you look at um, Missy Elliott, Doechii, where they're using this playful switching between a tough, deep voice to a high pitched, almost cartoonish delivery. And that is, people find it playful and stuff like that, but it is very, like, intentional in how they consistently and persistently, you know, use this double standard to switch back and forth. For instance, Nicki especially, has that Roman character. And so I think a lot of times when male rappers are often praised for this aggressive use of AVE, female rappers many times will face a different expectation, and they're seen to be too aggressive or unladylike, and so a lot of them will highlight that directly in the music, like almost breaking down that fourth wall to talk about how gender influences how they are received and how they can use AVE, how they can use rap, and so I think, AVE in this way is still used to challenge norms. It's still used to reclaim space, even though it's almost internal space within hip hop. And that same mindset can be taken out into the broader world and be used to um, further the evolution of AVE, whether, slang or storytelling and performance styles, it's just saying it's here to stay. This is how I'm going to express my gender, how I'm going to express my power, how I'm going to express my identity. It's going to be constantly evolving. These are some more examples that I just picked out from certain songs about what we talked about, and I did touch briefly about 2, 3 slides ago. But I'm gonna let you read over it, and I'm just gonna say AV is the soul of hip hop. And so when you look at and listen to songs, think about what makes you connect so deeply with it. Especially when it's by artists of color. AV also plays a big role, as we spoke about during the intro, in film and television. And so, from early stereotypes to modern day, more authentic representation, the presence of AV in visual media is ever evolving. And, sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes it is in more problematic ways. So, it's growing the wrong way. In the early days of cinema, AVE was often used like exaggerated and very racist ways through minstrels and stereotypical black characters. You look at films like Birth of the Nation, not the most recent one, but the one from 1915, that promoted these very harmful caricatures of black speech and reinforced essentially racist, not essentially, it was very just blatant racist narratives. The black exploitation films of the 1970s, like Shaft and Superfly, were technically supposed to be empowered images of blackness, but its reliance on exaggerated AAV for dramatic effect is what really took away from it being more prominent. And so you see a shift in that in the 1980s and the 1990s with directors like Spike Lee and John Singleton. And once people of color start getting behind the getting of directing and writing and have more say in what films are turning out, we see the portrayal seems to be more real and it tends to connect deeper to black experiences. So 1989's Do the Right Thing, 1991's Boys in the Hood, it has a natural growth of black community and giving voice to real life struggles. You see shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel Air. Well, kudos to anybody who can put in the comment what was that linguistic slip I just did. Um, anyway, The Fresh Prince of Bel Air and Martin, they blend humor and AV in a way that audiences not only can understand, but it enriched the narrative of the story and it celebrated black language. And, even Martin, with how some of the issues that it age, you look at something like Living Single that even has stand the test of time for how impactful it has been. You look at more recent shows like Atlanta by Donald Glover, Issa Rae's Insecure, and Quentin Brunson's Abbott Elementary. AAV is an organic part of their character development. It is not a gimmick. It is not something that everybody stops and points out and they're like, that's a black word. No, it is just happening. It is not the focus of the story. And that's very true with the surprise success of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I know a lot of people, especially people who are Marvel or DC, didn't really expect Sony to come out with something that was so great. But they introduced younger audiences to AAVE through characters that look like Miles Morales, that help normalize black speech in a very authentic way. And so Hollywood struggles with continuing to do that because they struggle with upholding black writers and allowing them the freedom to not have to use antiquated or stereotypical AAV or slang. And so you can see shows where they pull from internet culture and they try to incorporate it, and it just doesn't work. You think about some of the social media posts that you may have seen where they use AAVE, and like literally, it's like nails on a chalkboard. The way the words are aligned, you'll never say that's not how we talk. And so immediately you can tell when they're trying to fake the funk because on platforms like Twitter and TikTok, it happens a lot because people have just used these or seen these popular words, this Gen Z lingo, and they don't know how to use it. And so they'll be like, oh, period, sis, is given. We've been new. We've been new. Who knew? Who knew what? Because you're not giving credit to the black community. So I don't think you knew anything, right? And so when black people use this AAV in professional and public spaces, they're seen as uneducated, unprofessional. If a white actor or a white influencer uses it, they're seen as cool and trendy. And so that is, in essence, the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. Because when it is used correctly, with respect, with responsibility, it's going to be a tool to push the story forward. When it is used incorrectly, it is used for comedy. It is used for token representation. It is used for mockery. That leaves us with just controversies and appropriation. And so, as AAV becomes more visible in mainstream media, it sparks debates about how do we handle misuse. And, as a legitimate linguistic system, you have to understand you need to protect it from being commodified, from being exploited, and, from being used without understanding of its original origins. So, it's like, what is the correct way and incorrect way? AV and media can reinforce negative stereotypes about black people. And so when it is used, filmmakers and writers using AV style dialogue to talk about or create black characters without any true understanding of the speech pattern, it's unnatural and it's exaggerated. And so in certain films and TV shows, you'll see it's used for comic relief. It's not used for any type of valid form of communication. It's not used to allow black people to express themselves. And so when it is used for that, without dilution, without modification for white audiences, that should always be celebrated. And so we should always turn up for that. And, make sure those films, those authors, those writers, those directors, those actors stay gainfully employed, stay in support. Because what we don't want to see is Black English being used where Black issues do not live, where Black leadership isn't employed. Because that's going to shape Black stories. They're going to be told and they're going to be misrepresented Black culture. And we need to change that narrative. Positive visibility equals appreciation. Negative visibility equals appropriation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions, feel free to share examples, personal experience, or observations that you may have. A little food for thought. We need to be very, just like we do with the food that we put in our body, critical about what we consume. Literature, music, films. We want to ensure that we're supporting authentic voices, authentic Black voices, and challenging the appropriation of AAVE.